My Lords and members of the House of Commons, I am deeply grateful for the address.
Well, we have some breaking news for you now. An explosive email from the Epstein files has been released with the convicted sex offender naming then Prince Charles as being responsible for his brother Andrew losing his job.
OK, this is big news. Entertainment editor Peter Ford joins us. Pete, this is the first time we've seen Charles's name appear, and it is considered a really significant development.
Yes, it is, in amongst the hundreds, thousands of...
How King Charles could strip Mandelson of his peerage, and why it matters more than you think. Let's be absolutely clear about something before we go any further. What is unfolding right now in British politics is not a minor scandal. It is not a footnote. It is not something that will quietly disappear by the weekend. This is a story about power, about who holds it, about who grants it, and, most fascinatingly, about whether it can ever truly be taken away. Welcome to British Coffers, where we cut through the noise and give you British politics the way it deserves to be told, straight, sharp, and without apology. If you are new here, do yourself a favor and subscribe right now. This channel exists for exactly these moments. Now, let us talk about Lord Mandelson, a man who has spent the better part of 4 decades being politically buried, only to resurface each time with a slightly more expensive suit and an even more dangerous smile. He is, by any reasonable measure, one of the most skilled political operators this country has ever produced. Whether that is a compliment depends entirely on your disposition. But here we are, once again, with Peter Mandelson at the center of a storm that is threatening to drench everyone within a considerable radius, including, and this is the part that should make you sit up properly, the Prime Minister himself. So let us start with the question that everyone is actually asking, even if they are dressing it up in polite parliamentary language. Can King Charles strip Mandelson of his peerage? And if so, how? The answer, like most things in British constitutional law, is both simpler and more complicated than it first appears. A peerage is not a contract. It is not a reward scheme with a points system that gets revoked when behavior dips below acceptable. It is an honor, and legally, here's the bit that matters, it is bestowed by the sovereign. That means one person gave it. That means only one person can take it back, the king. Now, in practice, the king acts on the advice of the Prime Minister, which is where things start getting politically rather delicious, because the Prime Minister, who would theoretically be advising the king to strip Mandelson of his title, is the very same Prime Minister who appointed him in the first place. You begin to see the shape of the problem. The mechanisms for removing a peerage are genuinely limited. There is the House of Lords Act 1999 for hereditary peers, which is a separate beast entirely. There is also the possibility of expulsion from the House of Lords itself under the House of Lords Expulsion and Suspension Act 2015. But expulsion does not, and this is crucial, remove the peerage. It simply means the individual cannot sit or vote. They keep the title, they keep the status, they simply cannot show up and cause trouble in the chamber, which, for a man like Mandelson, may feel like something of a light inconvenience rather than a genuine punishment. There is an offense that has been circling this story like a very patient bird of prey: misconduct in a public office. It is a common law offense, which means it has not been handed down in a single clean piece of legislation. It has developed incrementally over 2.5 centuries, shaped by case law, refined by judges, occasionally clarified by senior courts who grew tired of its ambiguity. It can, in the most serious cases, carry a life sentence. Let that land for a moment. Life sentence for misconduct in a public office. But here is where the law becomes genuinely precise in a way that matters enormously to this case. Senior judges in recent years have been very deliberate about narrowing the definition of what actually constitutes this offence. It is not enough to simply do something wrong while you happen to hold public office. The defendant must have misconducted themselves specifically in the discharge of the duties of that office, acting wrongly within the role, not adjacent to it, not in the general vicinity of it, within it. The courts have been firm on this, bringing the office into disrepute, embarrassing it, making it look tawdry and compromised. None of that, on its own, reaches the criminal standard. The misconduct must occur while the person is actually functioning as a public office holder, performing the functions that come with the position. It is a distinction that sounds technical, but is in practice the difference between a prosecution and an acquittal. The most common prosecutions under this offence involve police officers, a constable who misuses the police national computer to track down an ex-partner, a prison officer who enters into a sexual relationship with an inmate. These are cases where the wrongdoing is inseparable from the role itself, the access to the computer, the authority over the prisoner. These things exist because of the office. Remove the office, and the wrongdoing could not have taken place in the same form. That is the test, roughly speaking, that the courts have been applying. Whether the conduct at the heart of this current scandal meets that test is something that remains very much to be seen. It depends entirely on what the police find, what they can prove, and whether the chain of causation between the office and the alleged wrongdoing is tight enough to withstand serious legal scrutiny. And anyone telling you they know how that ends right now is either speculating or selling something. If you are finding this analysis useful, now is a good time to subscribe to British Coffers. This is the kind of content we do here. Not sensationalism, not hot takes dressed up as insight. Actual, rigorous, intelligent coverage of British politics that respects your intelligence. Hit subscribe. It costs you nothing, and it means you never miss an episode. Now, back to the pressure building around number 10. Because Mandelson's legal jeopardy, real or theoretical, is actually not the primary political story right now. The primary political story is the one being driven by a question that is deceptively simple and politically devastating. Why did the Prime Minister appoint him? That question is sitting in the room at every briefing, every press conference, every parliamentary exchange. It is the question that refuses to be managed away or answered satisfactorily. And it is the question that makes this scandal about more than one man's alleged conduct. It makes it about the Prime Minister's judgment, his network, his understanding, or apparent lack thereof, of how certain appointments look to the public and to the institutions that are supposed to scrutinize them. The phrase appointment scandal is doing an enormous amount of work in current political discourse, and it should be, because it goes to something fundamental. Who gets elevated in British public life? On what basis? With what scrutiny? And when things go wrong, who is accountable? The architecture of the honours and appointment system in this country has long been something that operates with limited transparency and considerable discretion. That discretion, when exercised well, allows for genuine expertise and talent to be recognised and deployed in service of the state. When exercised poorly, or in a way that appears to reward loyalty over merit, or that places individuals in positions where conflicts of interest become almost inevitable, it corrodes public confidence in institutions that can ill afford further erosion. Mandelson is not a naive man. He is not someone who stumbled into public life. He has been a cabinet minister, a European commissioner, a peer of the realm. He knows exactly how these systems work, because he has operated within them at the highest levels for decades. Which is precisely why the questions being asked now are so pointed, and precisely why the answers being provided are so unsatisfying. And Mandelson, let us be brisk about this, is not the only figure in this saga who has found themselves exposed. There are others in this story whose trousers are looking rather less pressed than they might hope. The pressure is not flowing in a single direction. It is spreading, as pressure tends to do in British political scandals, along the lines of existing relationships, existing loyalties, existing decisions that seemed defensible at the time and now appear anything but. The pursuit of this story is feverish because it connects to something the British public has been feeling for some time. A sense that there is a class of political figure in this country who moves through scandal the way some people move through weather, inconvenienced, temporarily damp, but ultimately unchanged. The resurrection of Mandelson after previous controversies is Exhibit A. The question being asked now is whether this particular storm is different in kind, not just in intensity. The constitutional
the parliamentary seat of Runcorn and Helsby from the ruling Labour Party in a by-election triggered after the sitting MP punched a constituent. It was the thinnest of margins, just 6 votes, but one obliterating a majority of 15,000 that Labour got in the general election just last year. The result reflecting a surge of votes for reform
based on what we
England's
know
local
of how
elections.
the law works in this area, is that the bar is very high. Deliberately so, some would say, appropriately so, others would argue, but high, undeniably. What we are left with is a political class under pressure, a legal process in its early stages, a Prime Minister facing questions he has not yet answered convincingly, and a peer whose fate may ultimately rest less on what the law can prove and more on what politics commands. These are not always the same thing. In Britain, they rarely are. That is where we are, and that is why this story is nowhere near finished. Keep watching British Coffers, because every time it looks like British politics has reached peak dysfunction, it finds a way to surprise you. Subscribe, share this with someone who thinks they understand how power works in this country, and come back for the next one. We will be here.